Sketch. Well, hello, Dr. Contrast, and I am here live with the whole program, and it's great to be back on board. It's been a little bit of a time here over the holidays. Hope all of you had a great holiday season, and Happy New Year to you especially. And Tara, it's great to have you on board. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much. Good to have you as always. So we'll take this thing here, and thank you. Hey, Happy New Year to you, Shadow. That's cool. He's in house today, so we're going to go through some things here that are going to be interesting. And I just want to preface this. It's a very interesting day for me. Over the holidays, let me give you a little bit of a backstory here, and then we'll kind of get into the action here as we go through the stream throughout the day here. I had a call over the holidays from an individual that somehow found my name through IndyCar in my Formula One days several years ago, and engaged in a conversation. And it was interesting to note that they wanted to look at some things here that asked me about the fact that they need some help on developing a surface or a vehicle process in their offices down in South Carolina. And my question was, what's the intent of this? Well, they couldn't really disclose that at this time. So I said, well, I'll be willing to go ahead and work with you and help this situation. So what are the ground rules and what are you looking for? He said, well, we're looking at a very interesting approach to, in addition to surface work, some engineering and some packaging work that we know you have had some experience in. I said, well, that I have, and if I can help you, wonderful, we'll try to do so. So the idea is, and I titled this program today, it's like more of a research process. So this is a kind of a test bed for me to send these sketches down once you see them today, and I'll go through some process with you, to send these sketches down to the source and have them evaluate what they're looking at and the possibility of us me being involved and some other individuals involved in this program, maybe Shadow and some individuals that would come along on board here to kind of get this thing programming. So I regret that I can't give you all the information. I'm honor bound to not disclose a lot of information on the fact that I'm really amazed. I want to find out how they got my name. That was a real surprise. I'm not disappointed in it, but it was a real surprise, and hopefully we'll send some information down here for them to look at and evaluate, and take it maybe one step at a time, and they do a whole series of programs on this whole program with their permission. So the concept was, from their point of view, let's start with a series of just side elevations, some real simple profile work with proportions. And I think the proportions they're looking at, they sent some information and stated some information along the way. For example, we look at Porsche as being a very classic looking machine. Some of the things that BMW are doing are interesting, and some of the advanced concept pieces and the like, which I agree with, and also some of the Mazda material. So it was interesting how they just were very cherry-picked some very simple things to look at here. And my task was to take off on that and begin to maybe develop something that was a little more less familiar, but a little newer, a little fresher. The stance might change, the proportions might change. So far so good in terms of what they want to look at. So what you'll see here today is a series of sketches that really kind of broad base the whole process, looking at different platforms and stances, different uppers, wheelbase stances, some body graphics and the like. So I just want to send out some information to give them enough information to make a decision on whether it's a Go program or not. So let me start here with this process here. This is page one. Again, what you'll see throughout the course of this whole stream today is just a series of elevation. That's all they want, just elevation studies. So look at stance, proportion, and scale. So here we are. Most of the things you'll see here as I move along here, these are 8.5 by 11 studies, and I switched to 11 by 17. And I went to 11:17. I went to more of a 10 scale look at, for example, sketch format, so that it can actually visualize what this thing might look like at a certain scale. So again, notice I went through some very simple, very organic fluid forms here, a little bit of a cove system on the body side. I'm not sure if they want to get into a lot of graphics in terms of body cuts and surfaces and undercuts, and I'm not a big fan, I'll be very candid with you, I'm not a big fan of some of the exotic material coming out now. It's really choppy. There's some great things being done by a lot of manufacturers, but the majority, they just seem to push the envelope, but we're getting more and more extreme. I'm not a fan really. I'm not really in love with the simplicity of it all, but taking advantage of some of the great romantic forms that are done, then enhancing them and giving it maybe a sharp cut here and there is more than enough to kind of settle it. I think that's the sense they're after here. So let me go through these processes. This second sketch, the idea here is this almost like this glove system. this rear quarter, this rear canopy or the rear quarter area being hugged by the mid cabin and the front cabin. So it's almost like a wrap over, a little sharper in some areas, a little softer in some areas. So I'm looking at, again, I hate to be redundant here throughout the course of this session, but looking at a variety of forms, both sheer, soft, highly cut, very simple, very elegant, enough range here to work with. The third one, again, kind of a modification on the middle sketch here, a little rounded front end, almost a Maserati kind of a poke to it, like the 50s Maserati coming off of that thing, and then a very simple body side form. So that was sketch one, and I moved on to sketch two, a little bit more fluid in terms of getting some floating uppers and the like, and get a little sportier looking here, a lot of very long, strung, high tension line along the belt line, then a very common, very upper. Maybe it goes into a fastback, maybe it's a drop-off roof, etc. Maybe it's a cutback a la Ferrari Dino. I'm not sure yet, but again, these are just ideas, looking for what they're looking for, hopefully to kind of hit a spark. Second sketch, almost the same thing. Very, again, a high-sprung quarter fan going drop back into the belt line, and the rear graphics, and a very exposed rear spoiler system here to work with it here. Third study. A little stretch wheelbase, a little longer, but again, getting into some almost a very romantic drop upper, for example. Remember, back in the 30s and 40s, there was a manufacturer in France called Voisin. His fame to fortune was taking this belt line and dropping it right in almost the rear quarter area and creating this whole droop system, very large-scale, elegant form. So a little bit of that history here, to drop that upper or that belt line in and take advantage of some of the sketch. And again, this high hip over the rear, a little intake piece, maybe a periscopic the visual system here, and again, very blunt front end. It's interesting because I really wanted to, I was half tempted to keep going and do some perspective sketches, but I kept hearing elevation. Now, when you go into perspective, if they choose things here, choose to move on, that's when you take advantage of getting the real surface work here to do the job. So I think that's all yet to come. This is a real test for me and the people I work with here in town to kind of get this thing set. And if we get this thing moving, it could be a very interesting program from start to finish. So anyway, high hip again, long strong belt line into the upper, and in a very simple, almost romantic form. Didn't lose sight of the fact that some of the great things of the 50s and 60s, more so 40s, I'll go back a little bit, 30s, 40s, and 50s, very elegant stuff. Some of the things Ferrari did, Maserati was doing, etc. Lamborghini, even some of the softer things we did, the Miura series, all that became part of the whole process of trying to study and get an idea of what this form might begin to look like, or this program could end up advancing into. So that's the second series of sketches. Let's go back and get rid of these guys here. Now, this is again I'm a little sharper in some of these cases where you go to almost a real sharp edge line here. This would be a lot sheerer, I think, from what they're looking at. But again, the same drop head coupe upper on it, a little bit of a series of extractors at the rear section. Again, very blunt front end, a very close coupled wheel to front to rear. Then stretching again in this lower piece. This might be a little more of a coupe series. It's not a sporty, but there's some elements in there that you could kind of work with in terms of this little return form and reversing it and going the other way, perhaps. But again, notice very round form around the wheels, keeping it real hugged and real tight to the wheelbase system there around the front end. Very little overhang. And again, that pooch front end on the thing, going back again to the 50s and 40s of those surfaces that Ferrari and Maserati and again some of the other individuals were doing in Europe at that time. And then Porsche. So again, that was it. And then a very abrupt rear end, same process. Wheels out in the ends, and then really get the body form against the cabin in between the two. So there we are. And then the last series, again, a little bit more advanced here, I think, and a little more stretch in that belt line, taking that same reverse upper here and putting some sort of a feature up on top of the front quarter panel to give a little bit of a character or a change of pace here. Again, notice how the whole belt line, the whole spring line goes rearward and then drops off very rapidly. And again, that same very, very low slung upper on this thing, so it's very, very sleek, very tailored looking. And again, with a little bit of maybe that slash line might be too much. That's for them to determine. Try to give it some character. There was a conversation about, yeah, we can use some little bit of character, but not a lot of torturing the surfaces. So I try to keep that pretty clean. And then the last but not least is the one in the middle. Pretty common, the same old romantic line, almost the old Ferrari Dino, where you roll over the front wheels and then come back into the belt line and kick it up over the rear quarter. So those things became pretty obvious here. Then the last study was a little sharper again, where we went back to that very close coupled front end around the wheel system, and then that center line area, pooching out and getting a lot sharper with this. It's almost like a slab surface coming into it. Now that could be slab, it could be round, it could be a lot softer. But these things, all the sketches that you'll see here today, the intent is to have them look at them and to massage them. And then my comment to the individual who called me over the holidays was, I'll send sketches out, but don't think that them as chiseled in stone or the gospel. You can change them at will, look at certain things that you're looking for, give me some feedback on how to take it into phase 2, and we'll begin to develop this thing further. So that ended the first pass here. So once I got through all that, I thought, it's interesting here. Maybe it's one of those situations where you go from I've really had a habit over the years of just starting like basic concept sketches and getting a character down. Then once you go through a family of forms, maybe it's time to kind of pull back a little bit and get a little bit more empathic or a little more emotional with it. So this next series you'll see here, I went right back down to, okay, same process, but now what do we do? For example, we get into some empathic studies here. Empathy to me has always been a great tool to look at newness, freshness, and delving into some real thinking processes and developing surfaces and shapes. No matter what the discipline is, it works all the way through, from transportation to product, architecture, interior space, even logo development. I've used this tool terrifically. So I think it's a case of getting the ground lines down and getting a little bit of a thick and thin process to deal with. And notice, which I'm always amazed by empathy, how you get thicks and thins. Notice how that surface changed. Let me get a pencil here so it's a little slimmer. Look at how that pencil, from there to there, there's a surface change. From here to here, a surface change. Too busy in the upper, and a little drop off here, and then that it gets busy in some areas. But what you're looking for here in these empathy studies, and hopefully what they'll be looking for, and I'll tutor them when I send these down to them about why this approach was taken, was to look at new shapes, new forms, but yet still fall within the boundaries or guidelines. That they really how elaborate you can become and how fresh things can become. And again, these are not given to the point of, oh yeah, this is it. This is, again, a tool for them to see certain things within the form and work from there. They got a question from Antera. Antera, so one thing I'm always impressed by, I was like, when you iterate, putting down multiple options with the game. Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. I think not getting too precious about anything. Yeah, and the reason behind that, Antera, is that it's a sketch. Nothing's complete unto itself, and until you get the feedback about this is the direction we're going to take him, I've always kept it very generic, always very open-ended, very ethereal, so that the individual that we're working with, for example, if it's Shadow or somebody else working with them, they can look into it and say, no, this is what we like, and this is what is preferred. And that's a good point too, Shadow. It keeps it fluid. The conversation goes back and forth. It's not a matter of, oh yeah, if you don't like this, forget it. I've worked with people who've made those comments. Didn't last long, but nonetheless, I always tell those people that work, the people who work like that, for example, this is my sketch, you love it, don't you? My response has always been, please come back when you can't stay so long. It just bothers me to no end that people, the assumption is, boy, look how good I am. No, you have to tell people how good you are. You're not very good. So my point is about this, my empathy was to open up the doors and say, okay, you've got a project here that might be looking at something a little more revolutionary. You want something that's a departure, but it's not really that far outside the envelope of what you're looking for. So I took a look at these guys, and went back to empathy. I'll show you some of the things we did here. I'm going to come back to them a little bit later on in the stream and put a bit of wheelbase onto it, maybe put some form into this thing. I see how it all begins to transfer from empathy into the process, the product. So there's sketch one. I went to another series here. A little bit. Now it gets a little simple. And notice I got past. This one was a real busy one. This guy up on top. Please let me know it doesn't exist. So we come back to that. And then the second one was a little more flavorful. Some of the bulk is there, but some of the shapes, you can notice how the thicks and thins, the hard lines, soft lines, you look in between this and look at this area here, for example. That could be an indicator of intake pieces. Draped canopy, I mean, who knows? And then an extractor and underneath the whole process, that's for them, hopefully, and I'm not saying this rudely, but that's for them to determine what's in this thing that could be unique. And again, back to a very sheer look. Again, sheer in the line form, but it can be very organic as well. You can have hard and sharp. So look at, for example, some of the selfs in the Cybertruck. They're very, very, very crisp, but there's some surface work in there that's a little soft and rounder to work with. So that's the second set of empathy studies. Then went to the third study. A little bit more, again, a little more romantic again, a little bit busy, but some elements in there with massaging, again, moving them around is the idea behind the whole idea. XD, it's pretty cool. Interesting, Terrace, thank you. And again, notice, again, uphill, very high belt line, long upper, trailing, and again, this could be an interesting component too. If you just raise this up, or I'll simplify this. Those are pieces we can kind of come back into. It's a magic here, and I'll come back to these guys throughout the course of the stream here. I mean, put a wheelbase in and show you a little bit of surface work, how they kind of move them around a little bit. So once I got past those guys, I went, okay, got some information here. Looked at some empathy pieces. Now, from what I've done there, so you'll see the rest of the sketches, you'll see some of this empathy come back into play and developing, again, from this package into some 10th scale studies based on what we did with the empathy here. So I'm trying to give these people enough opportunity, enough range of thinking that we're not just risks. We think about the surfaces. We think about shape and form in different variations and iterations. It's a matter of respecting what they're after and yet not tuning into it and saying, this is it. This is not the Michael Jackson tour. This is not it. It's getting into the fact that you're looking at certain things that they're looking for, and then, again, engaging in conversation with them to keep things fluid, as Shadow has stated. To me, the whole process is always based on what they think is fair and good for them. It's not me to judge. I mean, I can help them get there, but they've got to help us get that determination down. So let's go back in here. First pass into the 10th scale studies. Here we go. There we are. There we are at 10th scale. Now, all of a sudden, you start to look at some of the things we did in empathy and put it into some sort of package format. This would be much more of a, what I refer to as a format in terms of packaging. Getting the wheels down, simple base, about 10th scale. Again, very romantic form, very simple, very not too severe. A little bit of the McLaren massage, a little bit of this might have a little bit of a collapse in it. The surface comes in, breaks in, comes back out again. That again. My hope is that when these sketches are looked at, they'll begin to look at, that's an interesting surface. What about this? My comment, when those things come up in the sketch rendering process or dealing with ideation, I've always said, when people, for example, say, hey, JD, is that thing kind of wrapping in a little bit? Absolutely, you're a genius. I'm not going to dictate, well, I saw it as this. I'll let them determine what they want to see and how they see it. So that was sketch one. Again, upper, a little bit more romantic in terms of being a lot more crisp, a lot more succinct around the rear quarter, and then a floating, pardon me, spoiler up on top, a little bit more front overhang. Again, bringing that same dash line right into the body form and keeping it very direct. So interesting, maybe still a question, what do you mean by 10th? Oh, 10th scale really is this, for example, and Terrace. In the industry, there are two scales we work with when they get into generating models or surface work, for example, 3D systems or 2D systems. We'll take sketches, for example, and then take that variation, come right back down and say, okay, we're going to work with 10th scale, meaning that the 10th scale, if that is a 120-inch wheelbase, then that's a 12-inch scan. If this is overall length of 160, then that's 16 inches overall length. So we take the overall length of the actual machine or the wheelbase and the height. If this is, let's say it's 50 inches, then in scale it's 5 inches in height. So it's a 10th scale model or visual system, putting it all together. Now let me stop there. Does that help to answer your question, Terrace? It's taking the actual scale of the machine and just dividing it by 10 and giving it a scale. So that's helpful, because when you go to the engineering side of it, into full-size tape drawings, into the modeling system, you just take that 10th scale and move it up to full scale, and you've got a very good package. And in fact, when I was working on design staff, we'd actually work at 10th scale in sketch format, blow it up to 5th scale, then go from 5th scale into full scale. What's really interesting now, you've got a sketcher to work with and do a tape drawing over it, and it was just it's a very simple, efficient way to get the forms down. And the reason I chose to go 10th scale with this group is to let them know that they really are an interesting thing in terms of, we're not just looking at sketches here that are not dictated by a government or a form. These sketches are done at 10th scale, so you can see if you multiply it times 10, that gives you some idea of the overall scale, height, width, and etc. Not the width yet, but the height and length of the wheelbase that we're looking at here. So notice, this sketch one, first one, pretty straightforward. Second one, a little more radical in terms of, again, short coupling, long overhang up front, short overhang over the rear. You're going to see a lot of variation here in these last few sketches here. So let's kind of look at that from the point of view here. Now, sketch number one. Sketch number two, I'm going to separate these out. I'm going to come back to these in a moment here. Let's put those there and put these here. Okay, so shadow comes. The land on two birds up the. Oh, sorry about that.
Just so you know.
This is page 2, for example. Again, notice a little more radical now. It's getting a little more street almost rodish-like. But I thought the thing that would be interesting too for them to see is how to take that front end graphic and then in the wheel, for example, again 10 scale. But the unique feature here is to take an upper that becomes extremely masqueraded. This could be all transparent, for example. But what I did here was I went back into the history of the 1939 Blue Train Bentley Special. It was phenomenal. It had that little bit of that brow over the top of that thing. So maybe it's time to bring that whole upper, that cutback, and go and reverse it, and then come back and peek out of that with the windscreen. Some speed lines, and again, almost that same little variation in theme on the body side. And again, back to a very simple format and a dihedral. And strikes behind the scene underneath the thing. A little sheer here. I'm not really in love with this form. A little bit too sheer. Some of this stuff is interesting here. Maybe that shoulder comes out and has another compound line on it. But again, the front is not too bad, but that's a bit disturbing. If I'd have brought that right through, it might have been a simple form. I'm not really sure, based on their conversation initially, that this is going to be a real contender, because there might be some things back here that are interesting to work with, but I'm not really happy with the fact that if I took this rear quarter and put that front end with it, that could be interesting. So again, my conversation with them when these sketches are sent out is going to be very much to deal with that situation. Let's take a look at number 3. What if we took this and this and this and began to put these combinations together based on your input? That becomes highly interactive, which becomes extremely powerful, because you're sending a signal out to them that you're capable, you're competent, and you respect their judgment. And in turn, they'll respect your judgment because you're taking the time to listen carefully to what they're after. It's not a one-man show. It's not a one-man street. It's a team effort. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to as far as feedback goes once these sketches are sent down there. So that was plate 2. Into plate 3, again, a little bit more romantic now. It's starting to get a little bit more almost Jaguar-like, just almost very, very fluid, very simple, based on their elevation request. Again, notice very high belt line, but it just drops off and tapers back. Very sheer. Again, that same dihedral process behind it all on the underbody for some aerodynamics and so forth. And again, very simple front overhang. A little bit of a cheat box here in terms of maybe an intake and exhaust pattern out of Porsche and what they're doing now with the Cayman series and the like. So it's neat. And again, notice, again, much more fluid, and back to a very sheer belt line in the one below. And again, a reversed impact here on the upper. And again, part of the backlight as well. A little bit of a sheerness down below in the quarter. But this coming off of this scab line here with this very intake, almost Aston Martin-like, but a little bit more gutter, just much guttural looking. It's just neat. It needed something to break up the form. Now, it might be a little bit simplified. It might limit it all together. But again, that's the choice of putting it on design systems together so that they can see what's really actually how much of us. Let me back up. My intent is here, from a personal point of view, is to let them see that we have a variety, and I have a variety of approaches to look at. I'm not falling in love with any particular shape. I mean, I'll go through. It's like you said earlier, Terrace. I mean, there's nothing that I fall in love with. It's not a matter of having a favorite shape. It's being very fluid and flexible enough to take chances at certain things and make things work properly. I'm not talking about doing exotic, off-the-wall kind of strange things, but just being a little bit more not intuitive. What would it be? Not intuitive, but riskier in terms of taking chances with shape and form. And you never know until you get there, and you can take a very violent form and begin to modify it a little bit and soften it off a little bit. And all of a sudden it becomes extremely elegant. And then, okay, so that's plate 3. Now into plate 4, coming back in. Very high belt line again, back to that very almost it's a straight setup line as far as detail goes and getting it all put together. Very chunky looking. But again, that could be slimmed down, stretched a little bit, and that belt line could drop just a bit and get a little more fluid with it. So these are things that are kind of really interesting how to put it all together. So, and then this one's a much more aero approach to a very, again, high bone line coming right back into the rear quarter, high fastback through it, a little bit of a tail canard, like a fin system right and left to kind of give it some process here. And then there's a breaking up the surface underneath it with that little bit of a slash line. So that's sketch family number 4. And then the number 5, there's, again, very, very fluid process. Again, short overhang, short and short, but very, very gutty in between the two, almost has a real healthy kind of a guttural look to it. Again, bringing this pooch system forward a little bit and pulling it forward. Again, a very romantic rear quarter area. Maybe that drops down, a little more surface to it. That's all possible. Again, backing through here and bringing that whole shape forward. And then again, this would actually cut that line through the entry egress area a lot more fluid in terms of a lot more packageable. And again, notice, again, this is an interesting little concept here. We don't do enough of this, and I think one of the things that I've always really admired about Pininfarina's work over the 50s and 60s, he did a process for Maserati that was absolutely called the A6 GSC. If you look at that thing, it's one of the most beautiful surfaces I've ever seen. He did that back in 1956, I believe, 52 to 56. He built a limited edition series, but he used aircraft canopy technology to get the job done, which this one takes advantage of. Notice that we bring the A-pillar forward down to the end of the belt line. This one, we actually reverse that A-pillar, which means the door cut comes way forward on the sill and then back into the rear quarter area. So again, message being sent in these sketches are different ways to treat not only the actual forms, but also just interesting how the aircraft elements come into play and become new in terms of the marketplace. And quite honestly, I don't think anybody's doing that out there now in the marketplace. I've done some, we did some things for when I was at Cadillac at GM, where we actually took the pillar and reversed it and then put the actual windshield on a forward angle, for example. It was really spooky looking. Management hated it, but we loved it. So we kept at it, and it was interesting. But again, this is part of the aircraft technology coming back into it. So that's the family of shapes that I'm sending down here. But I want to go back to this empathy thing for a minute here and just begin to take one or two and show you how this stuff begins to work into the, and oh, by the way, too, before the end of the stream, I'm going to go through some of the things here in terms of getting some empathy sketches put together for you, see how to translate these shapes, how to develop them. But also, before the end of the show, there are two things I want to make an announcement on. Number one, we have not forgotten about the HS-108P attack aircraft. That's going to be interesting. Let's see, top sketch, the top sketch on page 3. 1, 2. You know what? I think you're absolutely correct, Terrence. Although I'm not going to pick a favorite, but I think that one has some elements about it that could be very, very interesting in terms of meeting the deadline, looking at the elevation, maybe keeping the surfaces in mind, keeping the benchmark of what they sent forward would be interesting to look at. So thank you very much for the input. That's very helpful. So appreciate the time and effort to look at that stuff. So we'll go back again to what we did here with this empathy stuff. Again, it's almost a touchy, always, I was going to make the announcement too, so forgive me here. Before we end up today, we have not forgotten about the HS-108P process, which is the attack aircraft. I want to end the program here today to show you some updates on what we've done with it. I have not forgotten about that, but I thought this is much more of an urgent process to deal with here to get this thing started with you today. And when you see some of the development of the HP, we're going to make some changes to it. We're pretty close, but I think it's a whole lot healthier than the first one we did, phase 1. In fact, Shadow looked at it and said, well, the one that we did initially was the friendly version. This one's more the attack version. So I think he's right. You wait and see what happens here. So let's go back to some of these empathy studies here. I'm going to pick one or two, and we'll work with this guy. Let's just take a look at this thing here. Let me grab a pencil, and we'll start putting some scale to this thing. All right, so let's go to this one right here. Let's say if I bring this up, let's say if I put a wheel in position, and put it there. Now, that override, that's not a problem. Come back off of this line here, and then ride it over the top of that bumper. There it is, and bring it back to the belt line. Take this line, bring it through. Come back. Now, see that little area right there? That is a clue right there, and so is this. So what do you do in between? Well, you connect it by maybe just doing something like this. Then you put lighting in there. You hood it. Then you let that become a little bit of canard. Now notice, look at the difference in the front end there, how that character starts to come back a little bit. Just going to open this up a bit here. Put that bulb into place. Let's do this. Let's hit the upper line. Let's bring that back and forward. There it is there. Now this. Let's bring that through. Let's just carry this on through. That comes down. Let's pick up this line right here and begin to close it off. And that becomes lighting. And that becomes aperture. Then you come back in and say, aha. Let's get that down. Let's put that little bit of perspective in this thing now. Front wheel to rear wheel. And a ground level. Put that down in the shadow here. Now put a bit of surface in this thing. Just run it right through. Again, notice how you take that empathy sketch and give it some character and personality. Now back in through here. Maybe this is all paint mask right here. That comes down to this. Rear extractor. Shadow. Again, tone. Drop the belt line. Implication, there's a break there. At this line, put a section through there in just a moment. But that break line right there tells me that glass line is split. Come back in through here. Entry egress geometry. A la Rolls Royce. Suicide door. Butterflies the other way. There's a good example of a bad example of how to take an empathy sketch and begin to put some proportion or scale to it here. Let's see, I love how you dance around the sketch, picking up things here. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, I think, behind it all. Interesting. You've been there. If you fall in love with one area here, obviously you begin to miss some things that are pretty romantic in terms of what can happen here. Just going to put a little bit of detail down below here where that shape runs off here. That comes out. Cut line here, notice. Now you have to imply, for example, what's happening section-wise. This is your 50-inch line right about in through here. Let's come back and come forward. Let me turn this just for a moment here. Let's get that. That's my center line or highest point of the vehicle. I'm going to come forward here. That breaks. Comes back out again, breaks. Breaks. Out again, breaks. Come rearward with it. Again, breaks. Back in that shape. And again, look at that form, just kind of, and then cut. And again, look at how normal surface, and right through this thing. Let's add a little bit of this. Just gonna take this in, put a real strong rake out front, and then just connect that thing with a support, like a shadow here, shadow there, light. I mean, look at that. Not the greatest thing in the world, but that's how you begin to develop an empathy in terms of finding a shape, putting surface to it, and giving it a definition, and then coming back in and saying, all right, what about this? Lighting, that can be kind of cool. There you are. I mean, that's how it's done. That's one way of looking at it here. So that's one little sketch here. Let's go back and look at it. I mean, another one here. Let's see, that one. This is kind of interesting one here. Let's go back and get this guy. Give it a little bit of character to it. All right, so let's get this. Open that up. Front wheel. Let's count it back. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to stretch that just so this is my ground line. I'm going to stretch that wheelbase just enough. Now let's get back this here. All right, the center line. Let's get the glass. Now let's take this. Let's break this thing. Let's come up over the top, break that in, and add another secondary line right in through here. So that shape is going to change by doing the following here. Here's my daylight opening. As my windscreen comes forward. That could be pillar line there. And again, let's drop this in. Let's take that right through. Now, interesting here. Now notice, a little swallow right there. Come out, break it, and then just drop that right back in into front end. Whole different look. Might not be the greatest look in the world, but it's there. A thick and thin line. Section-wise, how this comes out, breaks. Breaks. And look how that shape warps as it goes rearward. So let's go back in through here. Let's go back, get a little more tone to this here. Let's correct this lower here. Let's pick up that line, a little bit of a break in through. Let's kind of bring those two together. Bring that on through, and let's put a little bit of ground line in this thing here. This will open up. just going to get this down here. I'm just going to get this thing to read. There's tire. There's the rest of it here. Open it up. Let's open this up. Follow that shape through. Now this line, let's take that belt line, drop, let's take that tear line, give a little bit of guts in this thing. Let's go to double here. Then it loses itself, comes right back up, and just falls right in that swallow's tail. Same with this, same with this. We kind of root that back. So now notice, we could create a shape in here. This could kind of break back a little bit. It becomes fluid the more you work with it. So I hope that's beginning to help you about how we see these certain shapes. It might be a little bit too overdone. It might be too much of a stretch, too peaked, too this or that. But I think the idea behind it all, and sometimes it's just good too, to take a look at a simple thing like this and just say, okay, here we are. Again, plant the wheel. Come back. 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half. Let's take that line. Bring it rearward. Open that up. Door cut. The door cut. Let's do this. Door cut. The door cut. The door cut. This lower piece here. That little guy, let's bring that up. Let's kick that out to the last second. Let's kick that into here. Let's take that in. And again, close it off there. So that means a little bit of that rear wheel is going to be exposed. And we tone this out. Real severe opening there in the backlight, and again in the highlight. Glass graphics, dropping it out. A little bit of sway line in through here. Notice it drops and it picks right back up again. There it is. I mean, there's another way to look at this thing, how you begin to take those surfaces. Look at the tension that those two those forms create. Now, I'm not saying here these are actually wonderful, because they're not. They're just ideas. They're just concepts or character, what we're dealing with here. I know there's some lumpies in there, but that can be modified or shaped and adjusted. That's the rationale behind this whole process. That you take a look at empathy and say, it's a pretty radical approach. For example, there's a good example of one against the other. Look, oh, there's one, in translation, there is just pure empathy. We're looking for thick and thin lines inside these forms. Their challenge is going to be to look at these shapes and say, what if we did? What if? I think it's one of the two of the greatest words in the design world is what if. We don't take enough time to say, what if? We always say, how come? Which is much more negative. I'm a huge proponent of what if. What if that A-pillar changes? What if that rear quarter has more of a kick? What if it turns back? Maybe the dihedrals are different. Maybe the ledging on the rocker panels. What if they changed? Interesting. What if? That's the whole idea. That's where newness is found. I think the greatest challenge of all. How do you find newness? By just taking chances. The newness and empathy is a chance process. I've used it again. I can't get over the number of buildings I've designed using empathy. If you take this stuff and stand it vertically, all of a sudden you've got structures. It's just all over. It's endless. So hopefully they'll get that, and I'll school them that when we send these guys down to them. But again, that kind of wraps it all up in terms of where we are with this. And there's the first one we did. I'll give them a couple little teasers here. Maybe that's the wrong thing to do, but nonetheless, we'll see what they come up with. Those are the 3 empathy sketches. Let me review them again. That one I'd rule out, and that's an absolute nightmare. I don't know who did that, but it wasn't me. Don't I wish? There are times you just get carried away with the fact, that's thick and thin. I mean, that's just absolutely horrible. Anyway, into the second one, putting some scale behind, put a little bit of section into it, just giving it some chances here. Phase 1, empathy. Phase 2, into it, clean it so they can see where the actual process is. I'll keep this one clean. And 3, translating it. Now, maybe it has to go up, maybe it gets shortened. I mean, that's the whole idea, is to engage in conversation and begin to treat them in terms of, hey, this is a creative process. You're looking for a new look, maybe this is where we started. So here we are. put those back together here. And anybody, I'm going to stop for a moment here. I've been gabbing for a long time. Anybody, any comments or questions in terms of feedback of what you've seen thus far? Think we got a chance to get this program or not, guys? What do you think? Yeah, you're right. You're talking about that one empathy sketch, Terrace? I agree. It's just absolutely horrible. But nonetheless, sometimes you get carried away with it, and I get into a habit sometimes. It's going to get too much thick and thin and overcomplicate. And I think that's a good point, too. If you're going into the whole idea of empathy, the number one task and the most difficult thing to do is to keep it simple. The simpler the better. You can kind of fill in the blanks, but the more you try to undulate it and change it, etc., the way I did with that one sketch, just destroys the entire intent. So you go through the process of learning all the time, and I think that's the main thing. A shadow go, I don't know what will happen, Doc, but let's go find out. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see what happens with this thing. So let me switch gears here for a moment here. As I said at the beginning of the program, we have not forgotten about our friend, what we call the beautiful downtown HS-108P, which is a new attack vehicle we did. I'm not going to bring out the old sketch out because that was a friendly bomber. we do not want to be a part of that. So the last stream I put on was getting some modification changes to this whole idea of this whole new hammerhead shark biomimicry into an attack fighter, an escort fighter. And I won't take the time to go through a lot of sketches here, but this is where we were just before the holidays. Finally it dawned on me to get this split wing upper and lower piece would really be unique in terms of getting it to look more like a hammerhead in terms of some of the views we're looking at here. I don't know if I've got that sketch hanging. Yeah, there it is. Let's do this. This is some of the thumbnail studies here we did for elevation, some front and upper and lower wing. The gunnery system we still have to work on. And Shadow had a good point about getting more machine-like and less anti-looking gun. So this is a little bit round and soft. We might go back and look at some munition systems here. So the reason I brought this up to wrap up the program today was to simply say that we're going to go back in and modify this thing once we get this program, this research project down and out of the way and get some feedback on that, which I'll keep you tuned in on. But this was some of the stuff we did here before the holidays. Getting the stance down, I think really well. Then from that point of view, I went back and did this sketch, which is a rear 3/4, just a little gunnery system canopy piece here. But it had a real stance about it, which I thought was really much more energetic and a lot more aggressive looking. So I think we make some real changes. So let me stop right there and get some feedback from you guys and Terrace and Shadow. What do you think? Much healthier than where we were? Just going to give you a second here to look at this guy. Top Gun edition. Yeah, I think this is the Top Gun edition. I think there's some things. So some of the canopy looks a little bit on the weak side. We might pull this forward and get a little beefier with it so it's more substantial. So I think that's all part of the whole process when we get back into this facelift on the HS. Tweaks, but it's almost there. Yeah, I think you're right, Shadow. It's got a lot stronger looking to it. I think, and again, there's the rear 3/4. There's the front 3/4. And you can see almost back to around and back over here, starting to do a little bit more of a rectangular kind of a gunnery system, which looks a little healthier. This has much more of a, see how stronger that canopy looks? I think that canopy is much bolder in terms of where we're in some of the other studies here. Half the sketches I've done, I've nightmares. Oh, no. You've done some pretty interesting work there, Valdera, so don't put a label on those. Just keep cranking away at it, and it'll open up for you. You've done some nice work over the course of time here. So, there's this front 3/4. I thought, interesting. Some of the shapes, and it begins to really telegraph what this whole upper and lower wing system is doing. It's much more, and again, this little hammerhead piece here, but this almost complements it as well. So it kind of brings that whole, what I refer to as the eyeball platform, into play as far as the aircraft is concerned. So that was the elevation, or some of the perspective from the front. This is another one here. Got it there. And I think this, again, is another variation on theme from this one, where we actually took that whole shape and look how much more wing there is here. And now we broke it back a little bit. Didn't have as much angle to it. Again, notice a stronger canopy. And again, some of the munition systems, again, we have to work on that. Shadow brought that up when he looked at this. And he said, it's a little bit on a, not gunnery type, it just doesn't look evil enough. So there we are. And this is the final view here that we're going to work on here. That's a final little thumbnail pencil sketch that we did here just recently. Modifying this. And I think moving the canopy forward and getting a little beefier is going to be very helpful. Not going to lose that aspect of it, and not going to lose that upper and lower wing. Maybe pull this a little bit tighter and so forth, and change the munition systems. And again, get that whole canopy going forward and not lose this canard system back here. So that's all part of the formula for getting this thing put together here very quickly to make sure that's a good rapid approach to getting this thing done. And I think we might entertain maybe doing two views, maybe one sketch of this front 3/4 as one illustration, just as a single, a little bit of color behind it all. And then the other one would be more of a squadron, like upper and lower. Maybe this is the lead machine and one down below. A little bit different perspective. Get that color and get up on the platform. Yeah, the eyeball. Yeah, I think this one much better. The eyeball platform looks much more hammerhead-like. Like I said, I'm not going to bring out the old sketch because I believe we're all laughing in house saying, yeah, that was a nice start at it, but then it looked like the funny thing about it, the more I looked at that first sketch done about a year ago, when it looks like a horseshoe crab, anything but a hammerhead shark. So this has got a lot more character to it, and I think I just mentioned the shadow. He's in the studio today. We're going to start looking at some G12 modifications. We did that about 2 years ago. We're going to go back and revisit that thing and do some combined platform work. The guy is great to work with. He understands the system. He knows the machinery. He's got great insight as far as creativity is concerned. And above all else, I really enjoy working with him. He kind of he tells you the truth. It's either right or it's wrong. He said, hey, JD, switch pencils. This is terrible. Or else, you go the other way. Let's kind of get this thing. I think this is really a much more formidable program. So, well, thank you very much for tuning in today. And interesting, G12 GTR and rework it. I think so. That'd be kind of a fun project. Now, go a little spookier with it. And I don't want to forget too, before I wrap it up here today, that kind of brings you up to speed on the two programs. Number one is the research program. We're going to send those sketches down. We'll keep you posted on the results we get, hopefully by next week. And we get carry on and make it a regular program here. And also, I want to bring up to speed on the development made on the HS-108P. So it's still active. Things coming down the line. There are going to be some interesting things like some motorhome work, some Bugatti pieces, some landscape architecture, some product work. So I'm going to keep it fluid. But I'm glad to be back on board. It was just kind of strange not being on the air for the last 10 to 15 days. Strange. So hopefully good to be back. And interesting. Good time. Looking forward to it. It's going to be interesting. So before I sign off here, we're working on getting some short clips put up on the website. They'll be active pretty soon. There'll be playlist will be live and on the old channel as well. So that's going to be good to have on board. But again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with me today. It's good to be back. Let me just sign off by saying this: that please visit my website. drcontrast.com. We'll be adding some things to that. It's going to be nice. If you have any commentary, for example, or things that you want me to work on, please let me know. Drop me a note at jim@drcontrast.com. I'm always looking for things that can help other people, or maybe subject matter that they're kind of working with. It kind of gives me an idea to put together a program or a platform for them to work with them on. And to me, it's all about what I do. It's not what I do. It's what we do, or I do, to help others get there. And you've been an enormous help to me, especially, and Tara, you especially. I want to compliment you for the work that you're doing. A lot of neat stuff going on. I can't thank you enough for your loyalty coming in every Wednesday to work with us here and see this old guy get cranking at it here. It's just a lot of fun. Note here, Hammerhead said, I got my older cousin thinking about it. Remember, yeah, the older cousin, that's a good line. Got to remember that one to use it. The bottom line is I think we've come light years from where we were a year ago. And I'll say this too, and I think the thing that, very honestly at all costs, when I first started doing this on Twitch at Shadow's help and assistance, I wasn't really quite sure which way to take certain things. I played it very safe in some areas and wasn't really in the Star Citizen and some of the space materials that he'd been familiar with. So I've learned an awful lot in the last year or so, and I think it was time to go back and revisit some of the things I started out earlier with. For example, some of the bomber work, some of the introduction fighters. His battle yacht, to me, is still the premier piece. I wish he'd bring that in sometime and show you what we did. He put together a program and said, hey, okay, you're going to do, take the gloves off. You're going to do a battle yacht for me, and I want to have this, this, and this, and this. So we went through a whole bunch of sketches with this thing. So maybe at some point in time I can get him to bring that or photograph that. I've got some on the on my website, but we like that process to me. That was a breakthrough for me. I began to see what that Star Citizen theory is all about and what their process is. Great piece of work. He enjoyed it. I'm glad he did. A lot of time to get there, and then we did it on I think we did it on an evening broadcast that went worldwide. And man, that was just fun to go through. It scared the daylights out of me, but it did work. So it's good material. So thanks so much, folks. Look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, same time, same place. Hopefully we'll have some good news on this whole research project with this new machine that we're working on. This 10 scale sketches I showed you today, and also we'll bring up to speed on some of the things like the HP, other things we're working on there. We'll make some announcements as far as programs go. The playlist is being worked on at the website. So all that to say, have a great day. Thanks so much for joining forces with me. And last but not least, always remember and never forget to dare to be great, because you are. All the very best. Take care. We'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you. Bye-bye.